Aarav Malhotra and Nisha Malhotra looked like the perfect couple, a respected doctor and his elegant wife, building a new life together in Canada. To neighbors, they were quiet, polished, and successful, the kind of family that fit seamlessly into their suburban street. But behind the glowing windows of their home, Aarav was hiding a life no one could have imagined. Secret debts, double identities, and dangerous betrayals were piling up, waiting for the moment they would shatter everything. Within months, a marriage that seemed unshakable would end in blood, scandal, and tragedy on the frozen streets of Toronto. This is the story of how a husband's hidden world consumed both his life and his wife's, exposing the dark truth behind a picture-perfect facade. Dr. Aarav Malhotra's life looked like something out of a success story. Born into a middle-class family in India, he had worked relentlessly to carve out a future in medicine. His journey took him from crowded classrooms in Delhi to the polished halls of a Canadian hospital, where he quickly gained the admiration of colleagues and patients alike. Aarav carried himself with quiet confidence, the kind that drew people to him without effort. He was known for his gentle bedside manner, his calm voice that reassured anxious patients, and his ability to remain composed even in the most stressful emergencies. To those who knew him only from the outside, he represented everything people imagined when they thought of an accomplished immigrant doctor, ambitious, disciplined, and respected. His personal life seemed just as perfect. Aarav had married Nisha, a woman from a prominent Delhi family, in a wedding that was the talk of their neighborhood back home. The union was celebrated by relatives on both sides, a pairing of promise and prestige. Nisha was elegant and kind, admired for her grace and warmth. She had left behind her comfortable life in India to support her husband's career in Canada, believing in the dream they had built together. Friends envied the couple's seemingly charmed life abroad. Handsome, accomplished, and young, they appeared to be the kind of pair destined to succeed in both love and ambition. The couple settled in a quiet suburban neighborhood outside Toronto, in a home that reflected their achievements. The house was modern, with large windows that let in streams of light, and a neatly kept garden that Nisha tended during the warmer months. From the outside, it was the image of stability, the kind of house where neighbors waved across the driveway and children rode bicycles along the sidewalks. Aarav drove a sleek car to work each morning, while Nisha adjusted to life in a new country, learning the rhythm of Canadian winters and the solitude that came with living far from family. Yet behind closed doors, the picture was not as flawless as it appeared. Aarav's demanding schedule left him little time for his wife, who often found herself eating dinner alone at the polished wooden table. His silences weighed heavily on the atmosphere of the house, and though he never raised his voice, the distance between them grew more obvious as months passed. Nisha missed the constant chatter of her large family back home, the warmth of familiar voices, and the comfort of knowing she was surrounded by loved ones. The vastness of her new life in Canada often felt overwhelming, and while she put on a smile when speaking to relatives over video calls, her loneliness lingered long after the screen went dark. Friends and neighbors noticed small signs. Nisha would often walk alone in the evenings, bundled against the cold, her expression lost in thought. Aarav, meanwhile, seemed increasingly absorbed in his work. When people praised the couple for their accomplishments, they never guessed that their happiness was more fragile than it appeared. What seemed like the beginning of a golden chapter for the Malhotras was, in reality, the slow build of a storm neither of them could yet see. While Nisha believed her husband's long hours were a sacrifice for their future, Aarav was slowly creating a second world for himself, one that was carefully hidden behind the facade of a hard-working physician. At first, it began innocently enough. An occasional late night out with colleagues, a small wager on a card game. But what started as casual escapes soon became patterns of secrecy that he could no longer control. Aarav rented a modest apartment in downtown Toronto under a different name, telling Nisha that his unpredictable hospital shifts made it easier to rest closer to work. In reality, that apartment became the center of a life his wife knew nothing about. There, Aarav surrounded himself with people who didn't ask too many questions. He enjoyed the freedom of being anonymous, shedding the weight of responsibility that clung to him at home, With these new acquaintances, he wasn't the disciplined doctor or the devoted husband. He was someone else entirely, someone reckless, eager to take chances and hungry for excitement. Nights once spent reviewing patient files or attending medical conferences were replaced by poker tables, dimly lit bars, and the rush of placing risky bets. The thrill of gambling fed a side of him that medicine never could, a dangerous addiction that soon consumed his thoughts even during his shifts at the hospital. Money began to disappear. Aarav covered his losses by dipping into joint accounts, then by borrowing under his own name, and eventually by approaching others with carefully crafted lies. He promised quick returns and spoke with such confidence that people trusted him, never realizing the depth of his desperation. Each win only dragged him deeper, convincing him that one more night of luck would solve everything, but the debts kept growing, and so did the pressure to hide them. Nisha remained oblivious, reassured by his explanations of overtime and professional demands, never questioning the fatigue in his eyes or the late night absences. As the weeks turned into months, Aarav's secret world grew darker. His apartment became a place where he entertained not just friends, but also women who had no idea he was married. With them, he played the part of a carefree man living on his own terms, far removed from the husband returning to a suburban home where silence waited. This double existence gave him temporary relief, but it also pushed him toward an inevitable collapse. Every lie built upon the last, every risk demanded another cover, and his two lives edged dangerously close to colliding. What Aarav didn't realize was how fragile his carefully constructed walls truly were. All it would take was one overlooked detail, one misstep in his juggling act, and the truth would spill into the home he shared with Nisha. The debts, the affairs, the reckless nights in the city, all of it threatened to surface. Aarav believed he had everything under control, but in reality, he was only one mistake away from the unraveling that would change both their lives forever. One cold evening, as Nisha went about her usual routine of tidying the study, she came across a small pile of unopened mail tucked carelessly beneath a stack of medical journals. At first she thought nothing of it, assuming they were routine hospital notices or advertisements that Aarav had overlooked. But when she picked them up, her eyes froze on the bold letters stamped across the top of one envelope. Final notice. The letter inside revealed overdue payments, large amounts of money missing, and warnings from the bank that their accounts were dangerously in arrears. Confusion clouded her mind. Aarav had always spoken of stability, of a comfortable life built from a steady income. How could there be such debt when they lived so cautiously, when she barely spent on anything outside the necessities? The discovery unsettled her deeply. For days, she tried to convince herself there must be some explanation, perhaps a temporary issue with billing or an error on the bank's part. But more letters followed, hidden in drawers and tucked into his jacket pockets. The sums were staggering, amounts she knew were far beyond anything they had ever discussed. Each paper she unfolded was like another crack, splintering the life she thought she knew. Her suspicion grew when she began noticing details she had once dismissed. Aarav's phone often buzzed late at night, and he would quietly leave the room to take the calls. On weekends, he sometimes claimed he was being called in for emergencies, though he returned smelling faintly of cologne rather than antiseptic. The gap between them widened, but this time Nisha was no longer simply lonely, she was watchful. She began keeping track of his comings and goings, her intuition telling her that what she had found in the letters was only the beginning. One afternoon, while sorting through his laundry, she found a crumpled receipt from a restaurant downtown, the kind of place couples visited for intimate dinners. The date and time on the slip matched a night when Aarav had claimed he was covering a late shift at the hospital. The realization shook her to her core. It wasn't only money that was missing. It was truth, loyalty, and perhaps even her place in his life. For days afterward, Nisha felt like a stranger in her own home, her mind replaying the possibilities over and over. Eventually, she resolved to see for herself what Aarav was hiding. With quiet determination, she followed him one evening after he left for work. Her heart raced as she trailed his car into the city. keeping her distance until he parked in front of an apartment building she had never seen before. Watching from the shadows, she saw him enter with the ease of someone who belonged there. Hours passed before he emerged again, not in his scrubs, but dressed casually, his demeanor relaxed in a way she hadn't seen at home in months. The truth had revealed itself with a clarity that both devastated and hardened her. Aarav was living a life that excluded her completely, a life built on lies and secrets she had never suspected he was capable of. For Nisha, the betrayal was unbearable, but so was the silence. She carried the knowledge like a heavy stone inside her chest, waiting, planning, and knowing that sooner or later she would confront the man she thought she had married. The night that changed everything arrived quietly, wrapped in a heavy snowfall that blanketed the neighborhood in silence. From the outside, the Malhotra home looked peaceful, its windows glowing faintly against the winter darkness. Inside, however, the atmosphere was thick with tension, the kind that builds slowly until it can no longer be contained. Nisha had reached the breaking point. After weeks of silent observation, hidden discoveries, and the weight of betrayal pressing down on her chest, she could no longer live with unanswered questions. That evening, she confronted Aarav with the evidence she had gathered. What began as quiet words quickly escalated into something darker. Neighbors later recalled hearing muffled sounds, a sudden crash of glass, and a sharp thud that echoed through the frozen air. Few thought much of it at the time. In suburban neighborhoods, arguments were not uncommon, and the Malhotras had always been discreet, polite, and distant. The thought that violence was unfolding within those walls seemed unimaginable. Yet behind the locked doors of the house, the conflict spiraled beyond control. The living room bore the first signs of chaos: overturned furniture, a shattered vase, fragments of glass scattered across the floor. It was as if the life they had carefully constructed had broken apart in the same violent instant. In the bedroom, the struggle reached its tragic conclusion. Nisha was found lifeless, her injuries a stark testament to the brutality of what had taken place. The room told a silent story of panic, resistance, and finality. By the time the house fell quiet again, Aarav was gone. The trail of blood smeared along the back door suggested a frantic exit, a man fleeing from the consequences of what his own hands had wrought. The bitter wind outside erased his footsteps quickly, but inside the house, the evidence was undeniable. When Nisha did not appear at work the next morning, her colleagues grew concerned. She was known for her punctuality, for her dedication, and for her reliability. Calls went unanswered and messages remained unread. By afternoon, worry turned into action. Police were contacted, and officers arrived at the Malhotra home to conduct a welfare check. What they found stunned even the most seasoned among them. The carefully maintained suburban home was now a crime scene. Investigators documented every detail: the broken furniture, the bloodstains, the signs of struggle that painted a grim picture of what had transpired. Photographs were taken, evidence bagged, and questions mounted. How could a respected doctor, a man admired by his peers, end up at the center of such horror? Where had he gone, and why had he left behind such devastation? News of the discovery spread quickly through the community. Neighbors stood in clusters outside, their breath visible in the freezing air, whispering theories and recalling every memory they had of the couple. To them, the Malhotras had always seemed distant but stable, the kind of family that would never draw attention. The revelation that their home had become the site of a brutal tragedy unsettled everyone who lived nearby. As investigators pieced together the evidence, the search for Aarav began. His disappearance deepened the mystery, and with each passing hour, the story became larger than the neighborhood, larger than Toronto itself. It became a haunting tale of betrayal, violence, and a desperate man on the run. His double life no longer a secret, but a puzzle the entire city was trying to solve. 2 days after the grim discovery inside the Malhotra home, the search for Aarav came to a chilling end. His body was found on the icy shoreline of Lake Ontario, partially concealed by snow and debris swept in by the waves. The cold had stiffened his frame, but the despair etched into his lifeless expression spoke louder than any note could. Investigators pieced together the final hours of his life, concluding that after fleeing the house, he had wandered through the winter night, aimless and consumed by panic, before surrendering to the bitter elements. The once celebrated doctor, admired for his composure and intellect, had ended his life alone on the frozen edge of the city he had tried to conquer. The news sent shockwaves through both the Indian and Canadian communities. Colleagues who had known Aarav as a brilliant physician could not reconcile the man they admired with the story unfolding in headlines. Neighbors who once waved politely from across the street now stood in silence, staring at the house where so much violence had erupted. For them, it was impossible to comprehend how a man who appeared so disciplined and refined had been living in such chaos, hiding debts, gambling addictions, and secret affairs. The polished surface of his life had cracked, revealing a darkness no one had anticipated. For Nisha's family, the pain was immeasurable. Thousands of miles away in Delhi, her parents received the devastating news through trembling phone calls. The daughter they had trusted to a promising young doctor was gone, her life stolen in a country she had only agreed to call home out of love. The tragedy left them with endless questions, none of which could ever be fully answered. Why hadn't Aarav sought help? Why hadn't anyone seen the signs? And most painfully, why had their daughter paid the ultimate price for a man's secret double life? In the days that followed, the media dissected every piece of Aarav's hidden world. Reports of gambling debts surfaced, along with testimonies from acquaintances who revealed how deeply he had been entangled in risky circles. Stories of the other woman emerged, painting a portrait of a man living recklessly under the cover of respectability. The contrast between the esteemed doctor and the desperate fugitive fascinated and horrified the public in equal measure. Each new revelation added another layer of tragedy, as people struggled to understand how deception and pressure could spiral into such catastrophic violence. The Malhotra story became a cautionary tale, whispered about in hospitals, discussed in community gatherings, and shared across social media. It was a reminder that appearances can be dangerously misleading, that even those who seem to have it all can carry secrets sharp enough to destroy lives. In the quiet aftermath, their house stood empty, its windows dark, a silent monument to what had been lost. Snow continued to fall, covering the scars of that winter night, but the memory of what happened lingered long after. For those who followed the case, it was not just about the fall of a doctor or the loss of a wife. It was about the fragility of trust, the peril of hidden lives, and the devastating cost of choices made in secrecy. Aarav's dream of success in Canada had ended not with triumph, but with ruin, leaving behind only grief and unanswered questions.